In 1993, Crystal Dynamics began work on a mascot platformer for the company. With the likes of Sonic and Mario moving millions of units of software, they wanted in on some of that action. The 3DO had just been released that year, and Crystal Dynamics was working hard to make their presence known to new 5th generation customers. They had numerous releases in that first year, and spread themselves out across multiple genres. Gex was to be their crowning achievement, however, bringing not just critical acclaim, but some heavy profits with it as well. But things had not gone well during development. Numerous design changes, bugs, and disgruntled employees pushed the game well beyond its intended schedule, and the final product didn't see the light of day until April of 1995. It was met with positive press from the game magazines of the era, and went on to sell well and become the pack-in for the 3DO a few months later. But in order for Gex to reach as many players as possible, Crystal Dynamics knew it needed to get it out on the other 32-bit machines on the market. In this episode, we'll be looking at the Saturn version of Gex, see how it fares against the 3DO original, and find out if it's a worthy competitor to the Sonics and Marios of the world. Released in late 1995, the Saturn version of Gex was developed by Beam Software, the house that also brought us the Lost Vikings 2 to the platform. Like most of these games, the story in Gex is pretty simple. A TV-obsessed gecko is kidnapped and must escape from the media dimension, which is basically a collection of themes based on various movie tropes. You have a horror-based area, a kung fu movie-inspired stage, a cartoon level, a jungle, and of course the lair of the bad guy himself, Rez. The level design in Gex is a platformer in its purest sense. Rarely are you just bopping along on flat ground. There is always a wall to climb, platforms to traverse, and killer pits just waiting to soak up those precious extra lives. Fortunately, Gex does have some pretty neat power-ups to help him out. These power-ups are spread throughout all the levels and give you things like the ability to spit fire and burn your enemies to a crisp, freeze them in place, and even electrocute them. There's also life extensions, invincibilities, and life replenishment that you can find. The most important of these items are the remote controls you'll need to uncover. These are needed to turn on the TVs to access additional stages. There are also special remotes that you can get to open up the other worlds and even a hidden secret stage. All of these stages have checkpoints that are Polaroid cameras taking your picture. Most of what you'll be doing in Gex isn't so very different from the other mascot-driven adventures. There's a hub world where you access each area, and then a sub-world where you access the individual stages. These stages have a few different types of gameplay. You'll mostly be running, jumping, and using your tail whip as your main weapon, but there are places where you'll need to climb walls to fully explore the stage. This includes some areas that actually allow you to climb the background tiles. Entire stages are built around this mechanic, and it offers up some variety you didn't see much in other games of its type. Gex also has the ability to jump on enemies with a tail bounce that works similar to Mickey's bounce in Castle of Illusion. There are of course bosses to deal with in every area, battles that tend to feature some sort of gameplay gimmick that sets it apart from one another. There are also bonus stages hidden about where you can earn extra lives. Finally, the original 3DO version used a save game feature that took advantage of the system's internal memory. Finding VHS tapes or defeating a boss would save your game automatically. That feature has been stricken from this version, replaced by a password system that opens up under the same circumstances.
Ow, it's in my eye!
The graphics of Gex are quite nice. The main character is well animated, as are his enemies. Stages are bursting with variety and some pretty radical changes in layout and obstacles. Backgrounds have nice parallax scrolling, and everything benefits from the expanded color that came with the 5th generation consoles. Mascot-based platformers had some great looking games up to that point, but Gex looks like a cartoon come to life. It was a mix of pre-rendered and hand-drawn art that just worked, and the Saturn does the original assets justice. In fact, the Saturn version is actually clearer and more defined, not to mention it runs at a higher frame rate. The 3DO original ran at a mere 30 frames per second, while the Saturn version here runs at a full 60. The only slight blemish that appears in the Saturn game are the mesh transparencies that appear in some of the special effects. If you are on anything S-Video or better, you will notice these pseudo-transparencies often. Aside from that though, this is a fantastic looking and running version of the game, and easily gives the PlayStation and PC ports a run for their money. It even has the trademark Crystal Dynamics commercials during the Attract Mode demo, which look just fantastic for full motion video that is not being accelerated by an MPEG card. This is kinda curious because the actual in-game movies don't look or run nearly as well. Still, if you thought Gex looked good on the 3DO, the Saturn edition here should blow you away. Gex is voiced by comedian Dana Gould, who provides the comical one-liners that define his personality. There are a number of these to hear, and some can be quite satisfying, but playing Gex long enough means you'll get tired of them fast. Fortunately, you can turn these off in the options, and if you go after the Japanese version, they are omitted entirely by default. As for the music in Gex, what's here is actually not bad and quite fitting. There's nothing as memorable as say Green Hill Zone from Sonic, but you won't be hitting the mute button to get rid of it either. Here are a few examples for you. I'm a big fan of this game. Having encountered it first on the 3DO, the Saturn version felt familiar and I love the improvements to the performance. Gex is funny, the areas are themed with things I can relate to, and it has enough in the way of bonus stages, hidden warp zones, power-ups, and the like to hold my interest. It's a great looking game too. While you can't really say it blows away its 16-bit competitors, it certainly benefits from a few 32-bit enhancements. It's bright where it needs to be, and dark and dreary when called for. The gameplay is also fairly solid. The basic attacks with your tail get the job done, and Gex can attack no matter what position he's in. Whether jumping, climbing a wall, or hanging upside down, you always have the benefit of defending yourself. There are unfortunately a few things that aren't so great about Gex. The screen has an annoying snap to it that allows you to get way too close to the edge before the screen starts moving in some cases. This can be irritating if an enemy is just off the edge and can hit you but you can't see him. It can make some of the tougher areas a real pain. And speaking of tough, Gex is not an easy platformer. Don't let that little mouthy green asshole fool you. He may look like your typical cute mascot, but this here is quite a bit harder than most of the games of its type. Killer slime, spikes, and pits are around every corner, and even with the bonus stages giving out tons of lives, it's really easy to burn through those quickly. The shitty password system doesn't help any of this a lick. While the 3DO version does have an internal save function, you are still a slave to either defeating the VHS level and finding the icon for the password, or defeating a boss for one. This means that you can get a few stages away from the password, die, and need to redo it all in order to get back. There are some areas that guarantee multiple deaths when you first see them, so those passwords become a nightmare to deal with in the late game. I understand wanting to provide a challenge, but this system virtually breaks the game for the younger audience. I think this was a real problem for the popularity of this game. Kids loved the way it looked, loved the gameplay, but couldn't get anywhere in it. These complaints aside, Gex is still a winner in a sea of Me Too software. For years, game companies tried to mimic the success of Mario and Sonic, and while most failed miserably, I think Crystal Dynamics did a fairly good job with Gex. Gex would live on in multiple sequels for the PlayStation and Nintendo 64, but I always considered this one the best of the bunch. The strictly 80s and 90s humor was endearing, and even though it got tiresome after a while, it always seemed to fit Gex's personality. I think this game came along at the right time, right as the 16 and 32-bit generations were merging, so it benefited from looking the part of a next-generation product. It was cool as hell to have a mascot voice his thoughts, especially since most of it was aimed at a slightly older crowd. I do believe that Gex could have been so much bigger had Crystal Dynamics focused on the Saturn and PlayStation first, giving it a more balanced difficulty and made the save system more accessible and easy to understand. That doesn't mean that they needed to make it super easy or anything, but the way things are done here, it was always going to have trouble appealing to a broader range of gamers. I mean, most 32-bit games had some pretty robust save features in place, but in Gex on the PlayStation and Saturn, you needed to set your options every time you cut it on, and then put in a damn password to resume your game. Software had gotten away with that before, but this was a new dawn of options and it just felt so lacking. But don't let my moaning about the save system make you think Gex here isn't a solid game. It's tough but varied, and I think many of you will enjoy its overall design. Its appeal is rooted in 8 and 16-bit goodness, and that alone makes it worth a look. If you're interested in Gex but don't want to pay Saturn prices for a copy, it tends to go quite a bit cheaper on the old PlayStation. I'm Sega Lord X, thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.